Sometimes they're recommended. They need to watch porn because their sex lives aren't working out. And
why are you looking at me while saying that?
I'm not, because you're the mediator here, you're the judge.
Welcome to the Showbiz Showdown. I'm JJ Anisiobi, and joining me on the panel for this episode, in the blue corner, senior culture writer at the Sunday Times, Jonathan Dean, making his debut. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you.
And in the red corner, etiquette expert Liz Brewer, also making her debut. Liz.
Thank you.
So I'll briefly explain the rules to you guys since it's your first time here. I'll pick a debate, you guys will debate it. At the end, you'll have JJ's judgment, and I'll say which one of you two wins. I want a nice, dirty fight. Make it as personal as you wish. Touch gloves. Touch gloves. Okay, so today's big question. Oh, I can feel myself already getting cancelled for this. Has the Me Too movement made TV and film too prudish? Because we are seeing less sex scenes than ever before. Penn Badgley, the star of You, that Netflix serial killer show, he has now said he doesn't want to do sex scenes anymore, and he feels he's in a place where he can say no to doing that, even though for the past 2 series of the same show, it's been filled with sex scenes. So, are we now in a place where we're going to see less sex on TV and film, and is that a good thing? Liz?
I really think it depends on what the sex scenes are portraying. You know,
sex normally.
The sex and the sex, yes. But in today's world, you know, some of the television programs which have been hugely successful have actually been some of the historic sort of period programs where they're showing the romance and the love that sort of grows, and then, okay, then we have the sex. What you're talking about, and I think what we're discussing, is perhaps with the slightly unnecessary violent sex, or the sex which is going just a little bit too far and too pornographic. You know, if you want porn, if you want that, there are porn channels, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong if people want to watch porn. Sometimes they're recommended. They need to watch porn because their sex lives aren't working out. And
why are you looking at me while saying that?
I'm not, because you're the mediator here. You're the judge. So I mean, what I'm fascinated with Jonathan, only because we had an earlier conversation, one of the programs which I find quite fascinating and amusing is Naked Attraction. Now, with Naked Attraction, you're you know, looking at their bits, and finally you get to see the head and they speak. And 9 times out of 10, it appears the relationship sort of ends. It ends after the date, which means that, in my opinion, people are actually being educated to think that sexual attraction stems from, okay, let's swipe right, there's the guy, let's have a drink, let's go to bed. Why aren't we in love?
Jonathan, is TV getting too prudish?
Well, I mean, I think on like the Naked Attraction point, I think it's not a great surprise that the kind of people who go on a late night Channel 4 show just to show their bits aren't finding love. It feels like possibly that's not the greatest like subset of people.
I mean, you wouldn't do it, for example.
God, no,
Not again. They're not having sex on Naked Attraction, and I want to talk about sex on TV and why it's been reduced.
I think there's 2 interesting things. So there's been a huge reduction in shows like Game of Thrones, which is obviously a show that for however many years it was famous for the amount of sex that it had on, often really quite violent sex, some quite nice sex, but anyway, a whole range of sex, but a lot of it, and that was kind of the point of it. And then as the show kind of reached its end, the sex reduced, and then last year there was the spin-off House of the Dragon, which essentially took pretty much all of the on-screen sex off screen. And then also, interesting enough, this leads to the point I'm trying to make. There's a film that was nominated for an Oscar this year called Women Talking, which again was all about sex, most of like admittedly like sexual violence. It was all off screen. And there has been a movement, post Me Too, I would definitely say, of taking sexual violence off screen, because they don't want, whether it's the actors, the actresses, the directors or whatever, a lot of it is actually just to do with the fact that more women are involved in writing these things and making these things. They don't want to see sexual violence, mostly which is obviously against women, on screen. It leaves people uncomfortable, it doesn't add to the story, it feels like it's making sort of something a bit more glamorous than it ever should be. That I think is a good thing. When it comes to just actual sex that isn't sexual violence, I still believe there's a place for it on on screen, and I think there's been examples, for example, the TV show industry, the TV show Bridgerton, that have a lot of sex, and it's all consensual. Basically, it's all kind of like, you know, the kind of sex that people hope to have after they have swiped right, but they don't tend to do. But it looks like it's sex that people want to have, both parties enjoy.
Right, but you're saying it changed, and therefore these scenes now are not being shown. And you think that's all to do with the actors. You don't think it is to do with the audience? Because from what I gather, there's been a huge amount of audience who have complained and don't want to see those sort of scenes.
It's not so much the actors, but there's certainly been protests. But obviously, all the power is held by the directors, the producers, and the writers. And there has been a change of who's in those rooms creating this stuff. But then the actors, like essentially actors, some complain, some get their own way, but they kind of do what they're told to because they need a job. Whereas I think, so yes, but I think there has been change. And there was always backlash against Game of Thrones. But then in fairness, it had millions upon millions of viewers. Yeah. So they didn't think they were doing that much wrong.
Liz, what about something like James Bond, the most recent Bond film? Toned down massively, far fewer sex scenes than ever before, but the entity of Bond, his character, is a misogynist, he's a bit sexist, he's a very old school gentleman, if you like, where he would be having maybe aggressive sex scenes. He would be pursuing women who are saying, no, I don't want you, I don't want you, and then eventually he gets the girl because that's how his character is written. Why should we then change that because you think it's the right thing to do?
But it still worked, didn't it? There was still
arguably.
Did you not enjoy it?
I didn't. I thought they'd watered down James Bond. They'd made him too much of a modern man, and they'd appealed too much to, let's say, the wokerati. I hate that phrase, but you know.
Well, I enjoyed it. But maybe I looked at it with different eyes. There was that build-up of romance. There was a lot is to do with your own imagination, what you see beyond, and. Did they change it because the actors didn't want to do it? Did they change it because of the audience complaining? The only bit I didn't like is the fact he was blown up at the end. Actually, we didn't see him.
Spoiler alert.
We didn't see him. I'm talking about the last one, but we didn't see him being blown up, so maybe he comes back. Maybe there was plan B. But as far as the sex is concerned, I never thought that any of the Bond films were over sexy. I mean, I thought it was quite normal type of sex. What I'm complaining about, what I object to, is when it's violent sex, when it's aggravated.
But violent sex does happen, though. That is a reality of life.
And I know, but I don't want to watch it.
Even if it's true to the story. So essentially what you're saying is we shouldn't show something...
Well, it could be. There are many things which can be true to the story, but we don't actually have to watch it. It can be assumed, or it's done off screen.
While I will go and say that I think kind of like that sex on TV is good and it should be there, I agree. I think because violent sex was always going to, in the history of things, affect women who were watching it more, and then it was by and large stuff that was made by men. And that's just sort of the way that it was. So to reduce that, I think, has been a good thing. And I think kind of it is uncomfortable for people to watch. When it comes to consensual sex, the Me Too movement has actually helped that because of things like, in a way, because of things like intimacy coordinators, these people who kind of go into sex scenes and say like, you can't touch that bit of leg or you can't touch that, you know, however people have sex. But like
touching the leg.
Exactly. That's it. But basically because there's now these people there who will say to a man and a woman, a man and a man, or woman and woman, like whoever, this is the dance. This is the bit that you have to do. Mm-hmm. It's made it actually more explicit because people have allowed that. That's how industry worked. Industry is the most explicit TV that I can remember being on. The show that I can remember being on TV. Yeah. That's post Me Too. And it's all because the actors felt a bit safer because they kind of knew I'm not going to be abused by such and such an actor or made to feel uncomfortable. So you could argue that.
They have special clothes now.
Well, yeah.
And then it's choreographed.
Yeah,
so they have changed that. Maybe that's made the actors feel a little bit more comfortable.
I think people accept violent sex, if you will, when it's a woman who's controlling it. So in industry, there's plenty of scenes with, I forget the main character's name, Sydney, I think her name is.
Banker 1, Banker 2.
Yeah, Banker 1. Yeah. And she is getting oral sex performed on her by a guy and then she kicks him out the room afterwards. That's seen as more acceptable than it being, another woman just giving oral sex to a man. I feel like that's more accepted now. You disagree, Liz?
No, I disagree. I just don't like violent sex. I mean, I don't like watching violent sex.
And so even when it's integral
I
to the
don't care
story
whether it's a woman and a man kicking a man out or it's the man kicking a woman out. I just don't like it.
Maybe Liz has a point from what you said earlier, that the audience is changing, because every Best Picture nom this year at the Oscars had no sex scenes, which for me, I was mega disappointed. But does that mean that the audience is changing?
We're disappointed in like Avatar 2 not having great kind of like blue alien sex scenes. You're like kind of like, why?
Like, oh, damn it, what have I paid for?
This is not the film I wanted.
Well, I have to agree with you. And in that case, I felt it was lacking. As I say, because there is sex and there is sex. And there's a difference between sex, which is formed through attraction, romance, love, and finally the ending. It's natural. That's what happens in life. If you're portraying it so that people are offended, then you can turn off, but I don't think it's necessary. With Avatar, I actually did feel there was something lacking.
It was sex.
What like lacking a certain, I know they're not humans, but lacking
it was a bit too pure, yes, yeah.
They did have sex in the first Avatar, I recall.
Remember that war with trees?
Yeah, they tagged them stuff together or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite glad they didn't do that again. But but I think it's interesting because I think, for example, you take one of this year's Best Picture nominees, which was Elvis, and you compare it to, say, Rocket Man, which was obviously another big kind of like biopic about a major star. Like, clearly Elton and Elvis both had an awful lot of sex. The Elton one delved into it and sort of like showed it, and they were honest about it. The Elvis one didn't, and I think that's partly because Elvis's sex was kind of, he was cheating with underage girls. Whereas Elton was more kind of like just discovering his homosexuality and like having like lots of fun. And I think like, so that's to show Elvis's sex would ruin the name of Elvis, whereas to show Elton's sex, just, oh well, that's just Elton, so it's
well,
fine.
In that case, the Elvis film hasn't been honest, and they've essentially lied to protect a man who was having sex with people who are underage. Yeah. But look, before we end, quickly, do you think that too much sex on TV and film is ruining sex for people in real life?
I think they need to change the type of sex that they're showing. And I think with a lot of young people today who appear to be getting their education from watching sex on screen, I think that has to be addressed, and I think it has to change. And I think they have to understand that, you know, good sex comes from actually having a really good relationship and working up the romance, and really that's a feel-good fact.
Well, ding ding, I'm sorry, that is the bell. That means the fight is over, and now I will decide in JJ's judgment who is the winner. So just to clarify, the question was, has TV and film become too prudish? Liz, in the red corner, you would say...
No, absolutely not. I don't think it has become too prudish in general.
Okay. And Jonathan, in the blue corner, you would say?
I think that it needs to continue to show sex, because basically everyone, like the amount of like terrible stuff that people have access to on their phones, the idea that like we should, like, you know, kind of TV gives you an outlet. It gives you something where you kind of think, oh, well, that might satiate me a bit. So I think kind of like they've got to keep on showing sex, but in a consensual way.
So essentially, red and blue corner now agree, making it a purple show altogether. Thanks for ruining the format, guys. Appreciate it. Well then, it's a draw for the first time ever. That is all we have time for. Comment below and let us know exactly what you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again.